Your company doesn't need more agents. It needs fewer AI illusions. AI agents has become one of the loudest phrases in the 2026 tech conversation. Vendors use it. Consultants package it. Analysts amplify it. And if you listen long enough, it starts to sound like every serious organization should already be deploying agents or risk falling behind. That's the trap. The promise is moving faster than the evidence. The dominant story says agents can take goals, decide intermediate steps, use tools, act across systems, and deliver business value with growing autonomy. But the document you shared tells a less glamorous and more useful story. There's still no universal standard definition of an AI agent. Not every multi-step system deserves that label, and the excitement sits next to real warnings about project cancellations, weak controls, cost overruns, and governance that looks mature on paper but doesn't hold up in practice. That matters even more for small and medium-sized businesses. A large enterprise can afford experimentation theater for a while. A smaller organization usually can't. When an agent moves from answering questions to taking action, mistakes stop being abstract. They hit processes, permissions, budgets, timelines, and accountability. This article focuses on 3 things. First, what an AI agent actually is and what it isn't. Second, which risks change when a model stops being only generative and starts becoming operational. Third, what a realistic path looks like for an SMB that wants to explore agents without buying the narrative before proving the value. The goal isn't to slow you down. It's to help you separate capability from labeling, momentum from evidence, and adoption from readiness. Not everything being sold as an agent is actually one. An AI agent is not just a chatbot with a better sales deck. In the source document, the practical distinction is clear. An agent can receive a goal, decide intermediate steps, use external tools, and operate within predefined safety rules, or guardrails. It also includes 4 core components: a reasoning model, tools that can read from and write to outside systems, instructions that define role and limits, and observability so its decisions can be tracked. In plain language, it doesn't just respond. It helps direct execution. That distinction becomes sharper when the document contrasts agents with workflows. Anthropic's framing is useful here. A workflow is a route predefined in code, while a genuine agent is one where the model dynamically directs the process. That's not a semantic detail. It's the difference between following a fixed script and choosing the next step based on context. Gartner's term agent washing captures what happens when vendors relabel chatbots or automated flows as agents even when the model doesn't truly steer the work. The buyer ends up paying for the label, not the capability. There's another important limit. The document explicitly says there is still no universal, formal taxonomy for AI agent published by bodies such as ISO or IEEE. There's conceptual convergence among major players, but not a fully standardized definition. So when a vendor says agent, the first useful move is not to be impressed. It's to ask what they actually mean by the word. A simple example helps. If a tool reads an incoming message, classifies it, and always follows the same hard-coded sequence, that's a multi-step workflow. If the system receives a goal, checks context, chooses which system to query next, adapts the path dynamically, and works within defined limits, it looks much closer to the agent model described in the document. That doesn't make it automatically valuable. It just means you're finally evaluating the right thing. The market is accelerating, but the evidence is still cautious. The market narrative is real. So are the warning signs. The document notes Gartner's projection that 40% of enterprise applications will include task-specific agents by the end of 2026, up from under 5% in 2025. On its own, that sounds like a major shift. But the same Gartner view also warns that more than 40% of agentic AI projects may be cancelled before the end of 2027 because of rising costs, unclear business value, or inadequate risk controls. Expansion and fragility are showing up in the same conversation at the same time. The document also pushes back against a common analytical mistake. mixing unrelated metrics as if they describe the same reality. It says the figure of more than 95% of enterprise AI pilots failing to generate measurable value, attributed to MIT in 2025, refers to enterprise AI pilots in general, not specifically to agent projects. It also notes RAND's finding that AI projects fail at twice the rate of traditional IT projects. Those numbers may both be meaningful, but they describe different populations. Treating them as one signal creates more drama than clarity. Cost adds another layer of distortion. The document mentions reported proof-of-concept spending between $300,000 and $2.9 million, plus operational cost underestimation reaching 1,000%. But it immediately adds the context many conversations skip: those figures come from large enterprise environments. Using them to estimate the risk profile of a 15-person business would be reckless. A number can be accurate in its original context and still be misleading when transplanted elsewhere. That's why, the trend is real is not enough. A trend can be real and still be badly translated to your scale, your team, and your control capacity. For a smaller company, the core risk is often not being late. It's buying into an operating model it can't supervise, measure, or sustain after the pilot. A more disciplined question is better: what specific value are we trying to prove, and what would make us stop? Security changed the moment the model started acting. One of the clearest claims in the document is that agent security is not just an extension of large language model, or LLM, security. When a model only generates text, the risk is already real. But when it can also take actions with real-world consequences, the attack surface changes in a more fundamental way. You're no longer dealing only with incorrect output. You're dealing with tool access, permissions, memory, execution paths, and downstream effects. The OWASP list for agentic environments makes that shift concrete: prompt injection, tool abuse, data exfiltration, memory poisoning, goal hijacking, excessive autonomy, cascading failures, and denial of wallet. If that language feels technical, the practical version is simple: an attacker may not only try to trick the model's wording. They may try to redirect what it does, what it touches, what it remembers, or how much it costs to operate. That's why the document's recommended controls are so operational. Use least privilege per tool. Validate inputs and outputs. Isolate memory. Require human approvals for sensitive actions. Monitor continuously. And treat all outside content as untrusted, whether it comes from messages, retrieved documents, API responses, or emails. That last point matters because a system can be well designed internally and still be manipulated through the external material it consumes. Things get harder in multi-agent settings. Once several agents interact, one compromised agent may contaminate the decisions of others. That's how cascading failure becomes more than a theory. For cloud-based SMBs, denial of wallet deserves special attention. The attacker's goal isn't to knock the service offline. It's to drive usage costs high enough to make the operation financially painful or unsustainable. Traditional risk assessments may not surface that early, even though it can become existential for a smaller company. The document also mentions Microsoft's Agent 365 as a control plane for observing, governing, and securing agents. The useful takeaway isn't that every company needs that product. It's that major vendors are building new governance layers because they recognize that existing controls don't fully solve agent-specific risk. Governance is getting louder, but operations are still messy. The governance story around AI agents in 2026 is full of frameworks and still short on friction-tested execution. The document highlights three dominant references. The EU AI Act classifies systems by risk level and could place business agents in the high-risk category if they profile people or make decisions affecting fundamental rights. The NIST AI RMF emphasizes govern, map, measure, and manage. ISO/IEC 42001 appears as an AI management system framework aligned with the broader ISO structure and compatible with ISO 27001. On paper, that sounds comprehensive. In practice, the document raises a sharper point: implementing all three simultaneously may become regulatory paralysis for an SMB. That line matters because it names a real operational failure mode. If a company barely has basic policies documented, telling it to operationalize the AI Act, NIST, and ISO/IEC 42001 at once may not be guidance at all. It may be governance theater. The document calls out this paper governance risk directly, adopting documentation without actually making controls work. The role boundary is also blurry. The document suggests SMBs will likely act more as deployers than providers under the AI Act, but it also warns that customization could unintentionally shift responsibility toward provider-like obligations. That ambiguity isn't clearly resolved in the analyzed material. It also notes that synthetic content generating systems may need technical detectability, and that NIST's generative AI profile adds risks related to CBRN, hallucination-like confabulation, offensive content, privacy, intellectual property, and information security. Then there's observability. The document agrees it's essential. But it also points out that the conversation rarely addresses how expensive full tracing, logging, and continuous evaluation can be. For a budget-constrained SMB, every agent must have full observability, can sound technically correct and still be economically unrealistic. That's one of the strongest lines in the source material. Observability without budget is an architectural drawing without land to build on. Interoperability makes the picture even messier. Protocols such as MCP and Google's A2A point toward real technical progress, but the document notes that universal adoption is not guaranteed and legal questions remain unresolved, including which jurisdiction governs cross-territory agent operations. The architecture may be moving faster than legal clarity. What a realistic SMB rollout actually looks like. The most valuable part of the document is also the least dramatic. It doesn't offer a grand transformation playbook. It offers a cautious heuristic. Start with agents that read and recommend. Then move to agents that write. Only later consider agents that execute sensitive actions. The source is careful here: this is not presented as an empirically validated methodology. It's an operationally sensible progression. That distinction is important because it protects you from turning a useful pattern into fake certainty. A practical rollout can be framed in 4 moves. First, define a specific problem. Use AI agents is not a business problem. Supporting customer service, improving internal operations, assisting sales tied to customer relationship management, or CRM, and strengthening marketing are. Those are the use cases the document identifies as most realistic for SMBs. Second, start small and prove value cheaply. The document notes the US SBA recommendation to begin with low-cost tools and verify that the value is real. It also cites the OECD reminder that AI adoption among SMBs remains significantly lower than among large enterprises. That should invite reflection, not panic. Lower adoption doesn't automatically mean failure. Sometimes it means the economics and control requirements are simply harder at smaller scale. Third, put minimum governance in place before scaling. The source includes a striking number: 75% of SMBs that tried implementing agents without a minimum governance framework abandoned the project before 6 months. That makes a strong operational point. Buying the agent first and sorting governance out later is not a minor sequencing issue. It's a repeatable failure pattern. Fourth, measure value like you mean it. The document recommends business metrics such as cycle time, cost per task, and tasks completed without rework, operational metrics such as completion rate, human intervention frequency, and latency, and control metrics such as blocked sensitive actions, logged incidents, and the percentage of complete traces. It also sets a healthy decision rule: if the system does not improve at least one of 4 core variables, cost, quality, speed, or scale, within a reasonable period, it should not move into broad production. A grounded example makes this clearer. An SMB might begin in customer support with an agent that reads incoming cases and recommends responses, but never sends them. Later, it might draft replies inside the CRM for human approval. Only much later would it make sense to let the system take sensitive action. That path fits the source document's logic and keeps learning ahead of exposure. The mistakes that turn promise into abandonment. The first mistake is buying the wrong metaphor. One analyzed source introduces the phrase, digital employee, to make agents easier to explain. The document pushes back hard on that metaphor. An employee has legal responsibility, a contract, managerial supervision, and disciplinary consequences. An agent has none of those things. If you picture it as a staff member, you start assuming forms of control and accountability that simply aren't there. The second mistake is assuming human oversight always scales. The source distinguishes between human in the loop and human on the loop, then immediately stresses the practical limit. If an agent processes 500 decisions per hour and a human reviewer can handle 20, oversight becomes what the document calls an organizational placebo. It exists in the audit trail, but it no longer functions as a real control. That's one of the most sobering points in the entire text. The third mistake is looking mature instead of becoming mature. That happens when companies accumulate frameworks, dashboards, and policy language without turning them into working controls. It also happens when they demand full observability without funding it, or advertise governance before deciding who actually owns failure response. Control aesthetics are not control. And then there's the final mistake, skipping the 3 honest questions. What specific problem will this agent solve? What will it cost to operate after the pilot? Who will supervise it when it fails? The document's conclusion is blunt. If an organization cannot answer those questions honestly, it is not ready to implement agents. Not because agents are useless, but because the organization is still in a position to buy an illusion instead of deploying a tool. Conclusion. AI agents in 2026 are real. So is the overstatement around them. The first point worth keeping is that an agent should be judged by actual capability, not by branding. Can it take a goal, choose intermediate steps, use tools, and operate inside meaningful constraints with observable behavior? If not, the company may be selling you agent language without agent substance. The second point is that risk changes category once the model starts acting. Security, governance, observability, cost, and supervision all become harder the moment the system can affect real operations. That's why the serious question is not whether to adopt agents in the abstract. It's whether your organization can define limits, measure value, and remain accountable when the system fails. The third point is the one SMBs can use immediately: don't start with maximum autonomy. Start with maximum control. Read and recommend before writing. Write before acting. Measure before scaling. Govern before expanding. That won't satisfy hype cycles, but it fits the evidence in the document far better than rushing into a capability your business can't yet operate responsibly. The market will keep telling you the moment is now. The evidence says something more useful: the moment is now only if you can define the problem, support the operating cost, and supervise the failure. Otherwise, you're not late. You're just early enough to avoid an expensive illusion. Si esto te ayudo, considera apoyar el canal en paypal.me/veconsultor. ko-fi.com/luisospina21292. PayPal, losospinaco@gmail.com. OSI necesitas ayuda específica con ciberseguridad para tu empresa, ofrezco consultas express de 30 minutos. info@vvc-consultor.com